Everybody knows that 12.5 inches is objectively the best barrel length for the AR-15 because it gives you the same velocity as a 14.5, but it's the same length as an 11.5. I'm not totally sure how the community came to that conclusion. I suspect it required many long hours staring at velocity charts and probably more than a few significant rounding errors in favor of the 12.5. But at least we finally know what the best barrel length is for the AR platform. Unfortunately, our communal research did not discover what the best gas system length is for the 12.5, so today we're going to be talking about different gas systems for 12.5 ARs and going over this build. This is a 12.5 mid with a front sight base. Very cool. Not very good, unfortunately. And I know it probably seems like this is just another video about AR-15 barrel lengths, and it is, so you should probably stop watching now because it's just going to get worse from here. Okay, you had your chance, let's go for it. Arguments about AR barrel length are fundamentally arguments about velocity, because 5.56 is a very velocity-dependent cartridge. 5.56 is a member of the SCHV genre, small caliber, high velocity projectiles. These get almost all of their terminal effect from explosive cavitation when they hit the target going extremely fast. More velocity gives you a greater effective range. Past a certain point, you're poking a very small hole in a fairly large animal and hoping it hits something important on the way through. The velocity curve of 5.56 is pretty easy to understand. Every inch of added barrel length nets you significantly more velocity, up to about 18 inches or so, when it starts to drop off pretty fast. You can keep getting more velocity from longer barrels. 24-inch varmint barrels are still fairly common, but the diminishing returns kicks in hard at about 18 inches. There is no magic barrel length that gains extra secret velocity without an increase in length. That's a piece of AR mysticism that never seems to go away completely. 12.5 doesn't have the same velocity as 14.5, 11.5 doesn't have the same velocity as 12.5, and 10.5 doesn't have the same velocity as 11.5. That's not to say there isn't a sweet spot of barrel length that gives you a nice short handy AR and still delivers effective velocity, but the idea that you can find some secret barrel length that gives bonus free velocity is completely nonsensical. The exception to that might be a semi-squeeze bore barrel design like the Triarch 12.5 Track, but that company basically imploded because it was unable to deliver on its own hype long term. So let's just go ahead and put that one in the regretful bin and not talk about it ever again. You could consider a barrel length as long as 16 inches to be short for an AR, since the original barrel length of the M16 platform is 20 inches, but that's obviously kind of a silly, antiquated way to think about it. 16-inch barrels are the easiest because of the current state of US firearms law. We could always pretend that laws don't exist, but that's not a smart gamble most of the time. The shortest barrel length, even worse considering, is the 10.3 inches, not 10.5 because of some legacy holdovers from chopped up M4s or something. I've said this before, and I'll continue to say it because it's so fucking hilarious every time I bring it up, but the effective range of a 10.3 inch AR with ball ammunition is slightly less than 45 yards. If you step up from a 10-inch barrel to an 11-inch barrel, and at some point I'm just going to have to stop saying the 0.5 at the end of these things because otherwise we're going to be here all day. But if you step up from 10 inches to 11 inches, you gain a bit of velocity, but that tiny bit of extra barrel length gives you significantly more dwell time, and that is huge. 10.3, 10.5, and 11.5 barrels all typically use a carbine length gas system, so the gas port is the same distance from the chamber on all three of those barrel lengths. Extending the barrel past the gas port gives you more dwell time, gives more time for the system to operate without having to blow out the gas port to get so much gas into the system in a short period of time that you can still move the bolt back. 11.5 really is just a fantastic barrel length. They're way easier to tune, and they run a lot better and last a lot longer before annihilating themselves compared to a 10-inch barrel. The increase in dwell time with an 11.5 doesn't seem that significant when you just measure it in inches, but when you measure it as a percentage of total increased dwell time, then it's pretty significant. If we increase our barrel length to 12 inches, it seems pretty good on paper because you get the commensurate increase in velocity over an 11.5. But the overall length of a 12.5 with a suppressor is still about the same as an unsuppressed 16-inch rifle, and that's universally agreed as a pretty handy setup. There are two problems with the 12.5. One is that we're getting dangerously close to the territory of pin and weld barrel lengths like 13.7, 13.9, 14.5. These are mostly attractive for legal reasons, but legal reasons are real reasons. Since so many shooters still refuse to use direct thread cans, they're probably going to have some kind of a suppressor mount on the end of their 12.5, which is going to bring the barrel length up a little bit. So if you go from 12.5 to 13.7, you pin and weld the right muzzle device, you end up with a legal rifle. You don't have to go SBR or pistol. So the 12.5 is already kind of a bastard sword length to begin with. It sits uncomfortably between the 11.5, which works great as a pistol or an SBR, and the slightly under 16-inch barrel lengths you can get to a legal status with a simple pin and weld. The other problem with the 12.5 is that it doesn't match up very well with the existing gas system lengths. An 11.5 barrel works great with a carbine length gas system. 13.7s, 13.9s, 14.5s all work really well with mid-length gas systems. 12.5 sits kind of awkwardly in the middle. The classic and probably most common gas system length for a 12.5 barrel is still carbine length, which is the same as a 10.3 or an 11.5. Absolutely not a problem if you intend to shoot unsuppressed, but if you are going to drop a can on there, all of a sudden you've got way more dwell time than you really know what to do with. You can step up to a 12.5 with a mid-length gas system, which basically turns it into a mini dissipator. There's almost no dwell time, and that means it's probably overgassed unless it's set up to only run suppressed. You're probably not going to find that holy grail 12.5 mid-length gas barrel that runs properly suppressed and unsuppressed. I built a cheap 12.5 mid-gas upper a long time ago that I used as sort of a test mule for a bunch of different optics. I never shot that gun suppressed, and that was probably a good thing because it was explosively overgassed. The build we're talking about in this video is a newer project. This is using a Faxon 12.5 mid-length gas gunner barrel with a front sight base. I mostly built this because I wanted to try out sort of a miniaturized knockoff of the Militia Works Fixie rifle. A 12.5 barrel with a mid-length gas system and a Midwest two-piece free-float rail looks and feels really awesome. This is a very handy gun, it looks cool, it has plenty of rail estate and a backup front sight base, which is always cool. I pretty much just built this upper as an excuse to use one of those two-piece Midwest rails, which really only work properly if you use them in conjunction with a front sight base. That restriction of wanting to use a pinned front sight base to go along with that rail meant that I had to choose between carbine length gas and mid-length gas. Carbine length gas means that the front sight base is going to be farther back, which means that we could only use a carbine length two-piece rail, and that would give us way less real estate for our accessories and our hands. So this was the only option to make this build a reality. The Faxon 12.5 gunner barrel is, surprisingly, fairly undergassed. It mostly runs reliably unsuppressed with a standard H1 buffer. However, you can see that the ejection is a little bit weak and tends towards the 4 o'clock region. This suggests that the barrel is a little bit undergassed without a suppressor on. However, you put a suppressor on and immediately it becomes overgassed. That's kind of the paradox of tuning a gun for suppressed use. It's sort of like the velocity argument. You're not going to find some sort of magical gas port setting that makes the gun run perfectly unsuppressed and suppressed without being overgassed or undergassed on one extreme or the other. That's just not how it works. Gas is required to drive the bolt. You can probably find a comfortable middle ground, but it's not going to be perfect across the entire spectrum. The advantages of these two-piece Midwest free-float rails is that they're extremely rigid, makes them a great candidate for use with night vision laser devices. They also extend slightly past the front sight base, so you can move your lights and sling swivels a little bit farther forward, which helps to maximize a very short overall gun. I set this thing up with a D-Ball i2, a Surefire M640 Pro, and also a Surefire dual-pad pressure switch, and there's actually room for all of that stuff on the rail. There's no way that would work if we were using a carbine-length gas system and a shorter handguard. The front sight base sort of limits what we can do with our laser and light setup. For example, I would sure love to run a Phantom Hill CTF2 on a 12.5, but because the laser on the CTF2 is directly in line with the bore, that means it doesn't clear the front sight base, so it's not an option on this gun. The D-Ball i2 has emitters offset to either side, which means that it does work just fine with a front sight base. However, because the battery compartment is on the front of the device, in order to change the battery, we've got to take the device off. Not a huge deal because in my experience, Steiner units are turned to zero pretty well, and since this is a fairly low output unit, the battery lasts a very long time. The optic I used for this build is the Vortex PST Gen 2 1:6. I kind of like the idea of having an LPVO with no offset red dot bullshit and just using the laser for passive aiming with night vision. Keeps the overall weight of the build down, keeps the cost of the build down, keeps the gun kind of simple and easy to use. But mostly it was just an excuse to get some more range time with the PST Gen 2 1:6 because I really like that optic. It's just so heavy that I never want to actually put it on a gun I like. In order to minimize the effect of the front sight base intruding into the view of the scope, I mounted the Viper PST Gen 2 on a worn 1.93 height riser. This is the second PST Gen 2 1:6 that I've owned and the second time that I've used one with a worn 1.93 riser. I'm not a big fan of tall LPVO mounts, and just like last time, I got sick of the PST Gen 2 pretty quick. Functionally, these scopes are awesome, but having 2 pounds of optic shit on top of your gun really ruins it in a hurry. What this gun really needs is an EOTech EXPS3 and a G33 magnifier, which is probably what I'm going to switch to after finishing this video. The way that I have the gun set up right now is not very reliable, unfortunately. What I think makes the most sense for a build like this is to run it fully suppressed with a dedicated direct thread can, such as the Gemtech Trek 2. However, mine is currently engaged on another AR. If I only had to tune this barrel and gas system for one mode of shooting, or even better yet, for only one type of ammo in one mode of shooting, I think it would be easily doable. For example, a Black River Tactical easy-tuned gas tube could restrict the gas enough to make this thing perfectly shootable without having to fuck around too much with buffer weights. But failing that, this could be a candidate for a bootleg adjustable BCG, or we could just buffer the hell out of it and hope for the best. If you really want to build a 12.5 AR to get that nice balance of overall length and velocity, there are other barrel options you could choose instead. Proprietary gas system lengths that split the difference between carbine and mid-length gas are becoming more common. For example, one of those is the Roscoe K9 Sage Dynamics barrel, which is a 12.5 with a proprietary patrol-length gas system. That one is a bit suspect to me because they chose to make the barrel out of 416 stainless steel, which is excellent for initial accuracy but has never really been known for long-term durability. A better, but much more expensive and harder to find option would be the Black River Tactical 12.5 Optimum barrel with its EXC length. I assume that means extended carbine. Those are never in stock and they cost a lot of money, but that is a cold hammer forged chrome-lined barrel, and it would probably be a fantastic starting point for a 12.5 build. Either of these intermediate gas system length barrels would probably be better for running suppressed and unsuppressed. They probably wouldn't require as much tuning. There may be other manufacturers out there making 12.5 barrels with indeterminate length gas systems. I couldn't find them with a quick Google, so we're just going with these two. But they're representative of the type, so you get the idea. As far as this build, the 12.5 Bastard Sword with a front sight base, I don't think it's a very good idea unless you're willing to dedicate some time and resources to tune the heck out of it. Anyway, just remember that there's no such thing as a free lunch. Everything has its ups and downs, and if you have any questions, please let me know in the comments below. Thank you for watching, guys. I guess I'll see you next time.